New York, New York. 8.3 million inhabitants. 32,000 streets. 5 boroughs. 3 rivers. Which altogether make up one city unlike any other on the planet. What's all the more remarkable is that when you stop to consider what makes the city so recognizable today, whether it be the iconic skyline, famous cultural offerings, or the energy of its streets, you realize that virtually everything that makes New York so renowned the world over simply did not exist even as little as a century ago. That is because much of the city's history has been shaped by constant evolution, development, and renewal, which has transformed New York unimaginably over the years. But how did this city, which started off as a small outpost for European traders just over 400 years ago, evolve into the sprawling mega-metropolis that it is today? This is how New York became the world's greatest city. Long before the bustling streets and towering skyscrapers of modern-day New York, the area was full of dense forests, flowing rivers, and abundant wildlife. The land itself was home to groups of Algonquin-speaking Native American tribes, chief amongst which were the Lenape people, who lived in harmony with nature, hunting, fishing, and cultivating the land in an undisturbed manner for some 8,000 years until the arrival of the first Europeans. The European exploration and colonization of the Americas began in earnest at the outset of the 16th century, as navigators from nations like Spain, France, and the Netherlands sought out new trade routes to these newly discovered and resource-rich territories. In 1524, the Italian explorer Giovanni da Verrazzano, sailing under the flag of France, became the first European to set eyes on the shores of what would one day become New York Harbor. Verrazzano claimed the area in the name of France, although any attempt to follow this up with colonial settlement failed to materialize. It would be almost another 100 years before Europeans would return to the area, and it would be the Dutch who would ultimately leave the first lasting impression on what would eventually become New York City. In 1609, the English explorer Henry Hudson, who was in the employ of the Dutch East India Company, had been tasked with finding the elusive Northwest Passage, purported to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Whilst on this expedition, Hudson sailed up the northern river of New York Harbor, which now bears his name in honor of his discovery. He claimed the land on either side on behalf of the Dutch Republic and, in the process, established a foothold for future Dutch settlement and trade in the region. The following decades saw Dutch trading posts established along the banks of the Hudson River, as well as others dotted along the coastline, stretching from the Delaware River to Cape Cod, which formed the wider territorial claims of the Dutch colony of New Netherland. Initially, these isolated dwellings and their occupants were focused entirely on the commerce produced by the fur trade, but in 1624, the Dutch West India Company decided to send a ship full of colonists to establish permanent civilian settlements in the region. They first landed on what is now Governor's Island, but were then dispersed amongst the chosen sites for settlement across New Netherland. A small group were disembarked on the southern tip of Manhattan, after it was decided to construct a fortification there to protect the entrance to the Hudson River and the valuable cargoes of the fur trade which passed upon it. With that, the foundations of Fort Amsterdam were laid out in 1625, and it quickly formed the epicenter of a new settlement which sprung up around it. New Amsterdam was born, and so too were the beginnings of New York City. Just to quickly pause for a moment and let you know that making these videos involves a lot of work on our side, from researching to a month of therapy. In the following year of 1626, with the hope of legitimizing their claim to the new colony, the Director General of New Netherland, Peter Minuit, purchased the land of Manhattan from a small band of local Lenape Indians in exchange for traded goods worth 60 guilders, roughly $1,000 in today's money. From here, the colony began to grow, and under Minuit's successor, Peter Stuyvesant, its population reached some 1,500 people by the year 1655. However, Stuyvesant was widely disliked by the settlers for the policies that he introduced. These included regulations on alcohol sales, attempts to assert control over the Dutch Reformed Church, and the blocking of other religious groups, such as Quakers, Jews, and Lutherans, from establishing places of worship in the colony. The Dutch West India Company attempted to intervene by introducing more lenient policies and reform. However, these plans were quickly interrupted by the outbreak of war. In the latter half of the 17th century, the Netherlands was locked in a fierce rivalry with England to become the uncontested maritime and commercial superpower of the age. Between 1652 and 1673, a series of 3 conflicts, known as the Anglo-Dutch Wars, saw Dutch and English fleets battle it out on the high seas for naval supremacy. It was against this backdrop in 1653 that the inhabitants of New Amsterdam decided to construct a defensive wall along the northern boundary of the settlement, modern-day Wall Street, to protect against potential attacks by English forces coming overland from New England to the north. Nevertheless, despite their best efforts to deter any would-be attacker, in 1664, the English sent a small fleet to wrest the entire colony of New Netherland and its capital of New Amsterdam from Dutch control. Stuyvesant was unable to call on any resistance and consequently surrendered the city without a fight. The English renamed Fort Amsterdam as Fort James, and the wider colony of New Netherland, as well as the actual settlement of New Amsterdam itself, as New York, in honor of James, the Duke of York, who would later become the future King James II. New York briefly fell under Dutch control again in 1673, but was quickly returned to the English under the Treaty of Westminster in 1674, which ended the series of hostilities between the two nations. Under English rule, New York continued to grow and prosper, fueled by a thriving economy and a steady influx of immigrants arriving from Europe. The city, however, retained many of its citizens, institutions, and practices that were introduced by the Dutch, including the institution of slavery, which had become embedded in New York's economy through the shipment of slaves through the port. So much so that by the 1740s, some 20% of the residents of New York were slaves, totaling about 2,500 people. As the 18th century progressed, New York emerged as a center of political and cultural change. In the years leading up to the American Revolution, the city served as a hub for the dissident organization called the Sons of Liberty, who targeted the sizable portion of New York's population who were fervent royalists. Similarly, the Stamp Act Congress of 1765 was convened in New York to unite the American colonies in opposition to the Stamp Act introduced by the British government. This articulated the grievances and taxation rights of the 13 colonies, which ultimately laid the ideological framework for revolution and the subsequent Declaration of Independence. During the War of Independence, New York City continued to play a pivotal role. Whilst it was initially occupied by the forces of the Continental Army when war broke out in 1775, the Battle of Long Island, which was fought in August of the following year, saw the American forces under General George Washington suffer a crushing defeat at the hands of the British. The subsequent occupation of New York by British forces would last for the duration of the war, with the city serving as the strategic base for their military operations across the country. By 1783, however, the war was ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, and the British began to evacuate their forces from the city, bringing an end to nearly a decade of occupation, which resulted in New York emerging as a shining light of liberty in the new American nation. In January 1785, New York was chosen to be the new national capital and played host to some of the most important events in the nation's early history, with the first president, George Washington, being inaugurated at Federal Hall in April 1789, as well as the first Congress being formed and the Bill of Rights being drafted, all in the same building on present-day Wall Street. With the dawning of the 19th century, New York had emerged as a global center of finance and banking, with Wall Street and Lower Manhattan being home to the Bank of New York, which was founded by Alexander Hamilton back in 1784, as well as the New York Stock Exchange, which was set up in 1792. Similarly, as the early 1800s progressed, New York continued to prosper as a center of trade and commerce, with the construction of the Erie Canal, linking the Great Lakes to the Hudson River and the Atlantic Ocean. Completed in 1825, the canal transformed New York into the nation's premier port, overtaking the likes of Boston and Philadelphia in both importance and capacity. As the city continued to grow in size, New York underwent a dramatic transformation as waves of immigrants from Europe and Asia swelled its population from 60,000 in 1800 to well over 500,000 by the middle of the century. Newcomers fleeing poverty, persecution, and political upheaval arrived in New York City in search of opportunity and a fresh start, thus transforming the city into a vibrant melting pot of cultures and ethnicities. The number of inhabitants within the city was also furthered by the abolition of slavery within the state of New York in 1827, leading to an influx of freed African Americans. The Lower East Side in particular became a focal point of immigrant life, with crowded tenements and bustling marketplaces teeming with new arrivals from Italy, Ireland, Eastern Europe, and China. However, with this dramatic increase in population came unintended consequences. The overcrowded living conditions were hotbeds for diseases such as cholera, which broke out multiple times beginning in the 1830s, and many of the packed tenement buildings were destroyed in the Great Fire of New York in 1835, which leveled some 50 acres of the city. Other poor and overcrowded neighborhoods, such as the Five Points and Hell's Kitchen, also had their share of poverty-related problems, with notorious criminal gangs, such as the Dead Rabbits and the Bowery Boys, roaming the streets and resorting to petty theft, robbery, and violence to make ends meet. The city's problems continued with the outbreak of the American Civil War, which engulfed the country in 1861. Although New York State was firmly part of the Union, the city's strong commercial ties to the South, coupled with its growing immigrant population and anger over conscription, led to divided sympathies. The New York Draft Riot of 1863 broke out over the resentment towards wealthy men being able to buy their way out of conscription, and the resulting 5-day riot marked one of the worst incidents of civil unrest in American history. Following the war, New York City entered somewhat of a cultural boom. Central Park, which opened to the public back in 1858, provided a green oasis and recreational space for all New Yorkers to enjoy. Meanwhile, the theaters of Broadway and the concert halls of Carnegie Hall played host to a dazzling array of performers and productions, cementing the city's reputation as the cultural capital of the nation. Similarly, New York saw the founding of several museums and libraries during this time, with the American Museum of Natural History being founded in 1869, the Metropolitan Museum of Art opening in 1870, and the New York Public Library being established in 1895. The increase in cultural offerings also saw journalism flourish, with newspapers like the New York Times, New York Herald, and New York World playing major roles in shaping public opinion, and the city itself becoming a national hub for the media industry. New York's continuing expansion further northward up the island of Manhattan, as well as development of connections into the neighboring towns over on Long Island, spurred the development of infrastructure projects, such as the Brooklyn Bridge, which was completed in 1883. Then, in 1886, perhaps New York's most iconic and defining landmark was gifted to the city by the nation of France. The Statue of Liberty was sited in the middle of New York Harbor and served as a beacon of hope to the millions of immigrants arriving on its shores, before many of them were to pass through the immigration office established on Ellis Island in 1892, and then onto new lives in America. The rapid scale of development within the city continued well into the following 20th century, with the New York City subway opening in 1904, connecting City Hall to Harlem and Brooklyn. The city's skyline also saw its share of development during this time, with the likes of the Williamsburg and the Manhattan bridges opening in 1903 and 1909 respectively. These feats were only outdone in scale by the competitive efforts of architects and developers who wished to build the tallest and most extravagant buildings in the world, which resulted in the iconic silhouettes of skyscrapers like the Woolworth Building, the Chrysler Building, and the Empire State Building, being topped off by the early 1930s, which proudly displayed the city's economic and architectural confidence to the world. Meanwhile, below ground, speakeasies and jazz clubs flourished during the city's era of decadence in the 1920s. Even though this coincided with the years of Prohibition, when the federal government outlawed the sale of alcohol, bootleg liquor and illicit entertainment flowed hand in hand. So much so that the city was estimated to have a proliferation of anywhere between 30,000 to 100,000 illegal clubs alone. The party times of the Roaring Twenties, however, came to an abrupt end with the Wall Street crash of 1929 and the ensuing Great Depression of the 1930s. Banks failed, businesses closed, and unemployment soared, leaving millions of New Yorkers finding themselves out of work and struggling to make ends meet. Many of the city's parks, including Central Park, became home to thousands of desperate people who constructed shantytowns named Hoovervilles, in an ironic jab toward the President Herbert Hoover for allowing their misfortune to happen. The situation for the city only began to improve with the outbreak of World War II in 1939. Although the United States would not enter the war for another 2 years, New York City found itself mobilizing for war as factories churned out tanks, planes, and ships for the Allied cause, while the city's ports and docks became vital lifelines for the transportation of goods across the Atlantic. When the US did finally join the conflict in 1941, many of its troops, sailors, and airmen found themselves embarking on huge ocean liners out of New York's docks that carried them on their journey to the front lines. The post-war years saw New York transform into the city that it is today. While many of the world's other great cities lay in ruins, New York emerged with new global prominence. It became the home of the United Nations headquarters in 1952 and inherited Paris's role as the center of the global art world, as well as becoming a rival to London's financial markets by the 1960s. Although during the 1970s, the city became notorious for its levels of crime and deprivation, efforts to modernize and rejuvenate saw many of the older pre-war buildings redeveloped or torn down to make way for modern glass and steel constructions, such as the World Trade Center, which was completed in 1973. Since then, like all cities, New York has continued to experience its fair share of trials and tribulations. What makes New York perhaps the greatest city in the world, however, is that no matter how many times it has been knocked down and set back, it has been able to pull itself back up and reinvent itself in such a way that perhaps many other cities of the world would struggle to achieve. Throughout its 400-year history, the city has constantly evolved and developed, time and time again, to the point now where it is completely unrecognizable from that small Dutch settlement that it started out as all those years ago.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good evening, New York City! How are we all doing? Habibi, how are you? It is so good to see you all here tonight. Now, as you know, a politician is only as good as the team around them. So I have to ask that team to start up this teleprompter. Because right now, it's off the top of the dome. And while we wait, why don't we actually begin? Can we first hear a round of applause for our incredible MC, Sarah Sherman? Can we hear it for the elected officials, the labor leaders, and the New Yorkers who have joined us this evening? And can we hear it for Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Yeah, very good. You know, there are many things one can say about our congresswoman, but I want to tell you a story about 2021. When we went on a 15-day hunger strike and won $450 million in debt relief for working-class taxi drivers, the congresswoman was there with us on that picket line. She was there with us on the phone after everyone else had gone home. And she was there with us again in the primary of this election. And that's because she's there for working people. And now we are just getting started. And let's please make some noise for Senator Bernie Sanders. I stand before you tonight only because the senator dared to stand alone for so long. I speak the language of democratic socialism only because he spoke it first. And when I ran for state assembly almost 6 years ago to the day, it was at Bernie's rally in Queensbridge Park where I led our first canvass. Signing people up for our email lists, asking them for $5 or $10, and encouraging them to believe that the politics of not me, us applied to our state government just as much as our national one. When we win on November 4th, and then govern from City Hall with dignity as the foundation of our politics, it will be because of the movement that Bernie built. I stand before you tonight as the nominee of a Democratic Party reinvigorated in its pursuit of making government work for everyone, not just the wealthy and the well-connected. Looking out at more than 13,000 of you here in Forest Hill Stadium, it is tempting to believe that this moment was always destined. Yet when we launched this campaign on October 23rd, 1 year and 3 days ago, there was not a single television camera there to cover it. When we launched this campaign 1 year and 3 days ago, my name was a statistical anomaly in every poll. 4 months later, as recently as this February, our support had reached the eye-watering heights of 1%. We were tied with noted candidate, someone else. I always knew we could beat him. When we launched this campaign 1 year and 3 days ago, the political world did not pay it much attention because we were looking to build a movement that reflected the city as it actually is, not just the one that political consultants think exists on a spreadsheet. And when we launched this campaign 1 year and 3 days ago, we were dismissed as a punchline in the halls of power. The idea of fundamentally changing who government serves in this city was unimaginable. Even if we gained momentum, they asked, how would we ever overcome the tens of millions of dollars in attacks that would follow? Yet we knew then what we know now. New York is not for sale. As young people showed up in record numbers, as immigrants saw themselves in the politics of their city, as seniors, once skeptical, dared to dream again, we spoke with one voice. New York is not for sale. And now, as we stand on the precipice of taking this city back from corrupt politicians and the billionaires that fund them, let our words ring out so loud tonight that Andrew Cuomo can hear them in his $8,000 a month apartment. Let them ring so loud so that he can hear us even if he's in Westchester this evening. Let them ring so loud that his puppet master in the White House hears us. New York is not for sale. "13 days after we announced our candidacy, Donald Trump won the presidency once again. The Bronx and Queens saw some of the largest shifts to the right of any counties in our country. No matter what article you read or channel you turned to, the story seemed to be the same. Our city was headed to the right. Obituaries were written about Democrats' abilities to reach Asian voters, young voters, male voters. Again and again, we were told that if we had any hope of beating the Republican Party, it would only be by becoming the Republican Party. Andrew Cuomo himself said that we had lost not because we had failed to speak to the needs of working class Americans, but because we had spent too much time talking about bathrooms and sports teams. This was a moment where it seemed our political horizon was narrowing. And in this moment, New York, you had a choice to retreat or to fight. And the choice that we made was to stop listening to those experts and to start listening to you. We went to two of the places that saw the biggest swings to the right, Fordham Road and Hillside Avenue. These New Yorkers were far from the caricature of Trump voters. They told us they supported Donald Trump because they felt disconnected from a Democratic Party that had grown comfortable with mediocrity and gave its time only to those who gave millions. They told us that they felt abandoned by a party beholden to corporations, which asked them for their votes after telling them only what it was against, rather than presenting a vision of what it was for. They told us they didn't believe in a system anymore that did not even pretend to offer solutions to the defining challenge of their lives, the cost of living crisis. Rent was too expensive. So were groceries. So was childcare. So was taking the bus, and working 2 or 3 jobs still wasn't enough. Trump, for all his many flaws, had promised them an agenda that would put more money in their pockets and lower the cost of living. Donald Trump lied. It was up to us to deliver for the working people he left behind. Over the 8 months of the primary, we told New Yorkers how we intended to address that very same affordability crisis. We did not do it alone. This was a movement powered by tens of thousands of everyday New Yorkers who knocked doors between 12-hour shifts at work and phone banked until their fingers were numb. People who had never voted before became die-hard canvassers. Community formed. Our city got to know each other and itself. This, my friends, was your movement. And it always will be. As the snow melted and the frost thawed, this campaign began to grow faster than anyone ever imagined possible. So many small donors chipped in that we had to ask you to stop donating. Please stop. We climbed the polls faster than Andrew Cuomo could dial Donald Trump's number. People started to learn how to pronounce my name. And the billionaires got scared. Or, as the New York Times would describe it, the Hamptons was basically in group therapy about the mayoral race. Andrew Cuomo and his corporate cronies did everything they could to make this campaign one of fear and one of smallness. Hell yeah. Obviously. They pumped millions into this race, artificially lengthened my beard to make me seem menacing, painted our city as a dystopian hellhole, and worked night and day to divide the people of New York. They failed. When I walked the length of Manhattan just a few days before the election, hundreds of New Yorkers marched alongside me. And when we strode into Times Square under a billboard with betting odds that showed Cuomo's chances of winning at nearly 80%, we knew that the so-called experts were set to get it wrong yet again. Andrew Cuomo was supposed to be inevitable. And then on June 24th, we shattered that inevitability. We won by 13%, with the most votes in any citywide primary in New York City history. Some of those New Yorkers had voted for Trump. Many others had never voted before. And when Andrew Cuomo called me to concede at 10:15 that night, he said over the phone that we had created a tremendous force. When you insist on building a coalition with room for every New Yorker, that is exactly what you create, a tremendous force. That force has only grown over these past 4 months. We now have more than 90,000 volunteers. And we have spoken to millions more New Yorkers. We have put forth new plans in these last few months for how we will govern, hiring thousands more teachers for our schools, taking on the consultants and the contracts in city government, and tackling the final boss of New York City infrastructure, scaffolding. But over the past few weeks, as this race has entered its final days, we have witnessed displays of Islamophobia that shock the conscience. Andrew Cuomo, Eric Adams, and Curtis Sliwa do not have an agenda for the future. All they possess is the playbook of the past. They have sought to make this election a referendum not on the affordability crisis that consumes New Yorkers' lives, but on the faith I belong to and the hatred they seek to normalize. We spent months working to convince the world that New Yorkers have a right to afford this city that we all love. Now, we are being forced to defend the idea that a Muslim is even allowed to lead it. These same big money donors and disgraced politicians have sought to rob us of our ambition because they do not think that you deserve the beauty of a dignified life. And time and again, they have encouraged you to imagine less because they know that a reimagined New York hurts their bottom line. I believe that this city is like the universe, constantly expanding. We deserve a city government as ambitious as the working New Yorkers who make it the greatest city in the world. We cannot wait for someone else to deliver it. We are not afforded the luxury of waiting because too often to wait is to trust those who delivered us to this point. On November 4th, we will set the course of our city back in the direction it belongs. And in doing so, we will answer a question that our nation has wrestled with from the dawn of our founding. Who is allowed to be free? There are some who hear that question and they know the answer without hesitation. They are the oligarchs who have accumulated vast wealth off those who labor from before the light breaks the horizon until long after color has drained from the sky. These are the robber barons of America, and they believe their money affords them a larger say than the rest of us. I am not just talking about the Bill Ackmans and Ken Langones of the world. I speak of people whose names you are not familiar with, who have no qualms about contributing more to super PACs than we would ever tax them, and who celebrate when those PACs flood our airwaves with commercials that plaster the words global jihad over my face. Their freedom doesn't just come at the expense of dignity and truth. It comes at the expense of the freedoms of others too. They are the authoritarians who seek to keep us pressed beneath their thumbs because they know that once we shake ourselves loose, we will never be held down again. Each and every one of these people think only to those who can afford to buy it. The oligarchs of New York are the wealthiest people in the wealthiest city, in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. They do not want the equation to change. They will do everything they can to prevent their grip from weakening. The truth is as simple as it is non-negotiable. We are all allowed freedom. Each one of us, the working people of this city, the taxi drivers, the line cooks, the nurses. All those seeking lives of grace, not greed, we all get to be free. And on November 4th, thanks to the hard work of more than 90,000 volunteers across every corner of this city, that is exactly what we will tell the world. Because while Donald Trump's billionaire donors think that they have the money to buy this election, we have a movement of the masses. And we are a movement that is not afraid of what we believe. And we've believed it for quite some time. Those who worry about what this movement may look like on January 1st are the ones who worried on October 23rd what it may look like tonight. But our purpose has not changed, and neither have our promises. As I said on the evening I announced, the job of government is to actually make our lives better. And in the exact words I said on October 23rd, here is what we stand for, my friends. We are going to freeze the rent for more than 2 million rent-stabilized tenants and use every resource at our disposal to build housing for everyone who needs it. We are going to eliminate the fare on every single bus line and make what are currently the slowest buses in the nation move around this city with ease. And we are going to create universal childcare at no cost to parents, so New Yorkers can raise their family in the city they love. Together, New York, we're going to freeze the. Together, New York, we're going to make buses fast and. Together, New York, we're going to deliver universal. We will make our city one where every person who calls it home can live a dignified life. No New Yorker should ever be priced out of anything they need to survive. And we believe then, we believe today, we will believe tomorrow that it is government's job to deliver that dignity. Dignity, my friends, is another way of saying freedom. Standing before you this evening, I take great strength from those who have labored mightily for the cause of freedom in America, who refused to accept that government could not meet what moments of crisis demanded from it. When the power of the people overwhelms the influence of the powerful, there is no crisis that government cannot meet. It was government that enacted a New Deal to lift a generation out of poverty, to create beautiful public goods, and establish the right to unionize and collectively bargain. My friends, the era of government that deems an issue too small or a crisis too big must come to an end. Because we need a government that is every bit as ambitious as our adversaries. A government strong enough to refuse the realities we will not accept and forge the future we know we deserve. A government that refuses to accept 1 in 4 New Yorkers living in poverty. That refuses to accept more than 150,000 public school students being homeless. That refuses to accept that 2 union salaries are not enough to put down a mortgage in this city. And a government that refuses to accept you being priced out of the very city you helped to build every single day. Time and again, our nation has teetered on the precipice of hopelessness. Now is one of those times. But in each of these moments, working people have reached into the darkness and reshaped our democracy. No longer will we allow the Republican Party to be the one of ambition. No longer will we have to open a history book to read about Democrats leading with big ideas. My friends, the world is changing. It's not a question of whether that change will come. It's a question of who will change it. We have an opportunity before us that few have ever received and even fewer have seized. It's the opportunity to show the world what it means to win freedom. It is the opportunity to live up to the legacy left by those who came before. We do not get to determine the scale of a crisis. Our choice is how we respond. Let us win a city hall that works for those straining to buy groceries, not those straining to buy our democracy. And let us look forward to January 1st, when the hard work of governing will begin. Those in power would like to describe our policy commitments as if they are illusions that will evaporate as soon as we approach City Hall. Let us show them instead that they are invocations of the future that we will win. And let us prove to each and every New Yorker that a politics of expansion does not just mean imagination. It insists upon fulfillment. We can make City Hall a place where New Yorkers come to expect the future, not just failure. But we are not there yet. Just as Andrew Cuomo's victory in the primary was thought to be inevitable, the same narrative has started to form around us today. When you read the articles that tell a post-election story of triumph while we are amidst early voting, when you see the Kalshi odds that have our chances of victory in the 90s, know this: you are reading the same things that Andrew Cuomo read when he went to sleep each night in June, believing that his victory was promised. We cannot allow complacency to infiltrate this movement. So over these 9 final days, I ask for only one thing from each of you: more. I know you are tired, and for that I recommend some Adani chai. And still, I ask for more. I know the attacks have intensified, that a warm bed is more inviting than a 6th-floor walk-up, that another evening spent knocking doors after a long workday feels daunting. And still, I ask for more. I ask for more because that is the only way that we win a future of more. So if you are able, I urge you, my friends, stand up. If you have knocked a door, turn your flashlight on. If you will knock a door, turn your flashlight on. If you have more to give, turn your flashlight on. Together, let us make a light bright enough to banish any darkness. Over these final 9 days and the months and years that follow, the powers that be will throw everything in their arsenal against us. They will spend millions more dollars. They will attack us from every conceivable angle, but we will not bend. We will not flinch. We will triumph over the oligarchs, and we will return dignity to our lives. Nearly 89 years ago to the day, FDR spoke before a crowd of thousands at Madison Square Garden. He said, "I should like to have it said of my first administration that in it, the forces of selfishness and of lust for power met their match. I should like to have it said of my second administration that in it, these forces met their master. My friends, I should like to have it said of our campaign that in it, the forces of selfishness and lust for power met their match. And I should like to have it said of our city hall that in it, these forces met their master." New York, our work has only just begun. On November 4th, we set ourselves free. Thank you.
Falaremos mais sobre isso. Beijos.